Today, we're diving into the dark side of discovery. It's a tough story, but a really important one. It's about how the noble search for cures can sometimes get twisted, and how some of the most critical protections we have in medicine today were actually born from unimaginable suffering. And this right here is the central, haunting question. The drive to cure disease is one of the best parts of humanity. But what happens when that drive has no rules, when there's no conscience to hold it back? Well, we're about to see how that very ambition, when it's unchecked, can lead to absolute horror. Okay, so our first stop is Staten Island, New York. We're going to a place that was supposed to be a sanctuary for children, but instead, it became a laboratory. This is the story of the Willowbrook State School. So picture this. It's 1947, and this old army hospital gets converted into a school for children with intellectual disabilities. The idea was to give them care and treatment. And the scale was already massive. It was built to hold 4,000 children. But the reality was much, much worse. The number of children sent there swelled to over 6,000. It was severely overcrowded, tragically underfunded, and critically understaffed. It was the perfect storm for neglect. And when journalists finally got a look inside, what they found was just appalling. This quote says it all. Kids were just left wandering around, sometimes locked in rooms, with basically no education, no therapy, nothing. You had situations with a single caregiver trying to look after more than 100 kids. It was a humanitarian crisis happening right behind closed doors. So into this environment of desperation and disease, hepatitis was just running rampant, walks Dr. Saul Krugman. Now, he was a top expert on the virus, and he saw Willowbrook not as a tragedy, but as an opportunity. He needed people to test a vaccine on, and here was a captive population of vulnerable children. So here's how his research went down. First, he went to desperate parents and basically coerced them into signing consent forms. He'd promised their kids a spot in a cleaner, newer ward if they agreed to the study. Then the experiment started. One group of kids was given antibodies, but the other group, they were deliberately infected. He fed them a mixture of infected fecal matter blended into chocolate milk. And get this, he even took kids who got sick and recovered, and then infected them again, just to see if they were immune. His work did lead to breakthroughs. It helped tell hepatitis A and B apart, but the ethical cost was just beyond measure. Now, with Willowbrook, you could almost argue it started with good intentions that went horribly, horribly wrong. But our next case, this is different. We're heading across the country to California, where a different kind of horror was taking place. One driven not by a search for a cure, but by a twisted ideology inside the walls of San Quentin prison. To really get what happened next, you have to understand this term, eugenics. It's this dangerous and totally discredited idea that you can somehow purify the human race by controlling who gets to have kids. And this belief was at the very heart of one doctor's work. And this is him, Dr. Leo Stanley. In 1913, with barely any surgical experience, he becomes the chief surgeon at San Quentin. And he wasn't quiet about his eugenicist beliefs. He was proud of them. And his job gave him absolute, unchecked power over thousands of inmates. Just to give you an idea of the scale of his project, look at this number. During his time there, Dr. Stanley performed over 1,000 sterilizations on prisoners, and the vast, vast majority of them were completely involuntary. In his own mind, he wasn't just a surgeon. No, he saw himself as a gatekeeper for the human race. He truly believed he was stopping future criminals from being born, criminals he called human filth. That word alone tells you everything you need to know about how he saw the people under his care. But his cruelty went way beyond sterilizations. Inmate accounts are just horrifying. They talk about him amputating a man's hand with no anesthesia at all. He did these bizarre experiments, transplanting testicles from executed prisoners and even from goats and boars into living inmates, thinking it could somehow cure crime or reverse aging. It was just a catalog of sadistic, unscientific torture. Look, it's hard to hear about these things. I know it is. But it's so vital, because it was the exposure of atrocities just like these that finally forced the world to wake up and create a system of accountability. The suffering wasn't for nothing. It became the very catalyst for change. And you can literally trace that change right here. After the world saw the horrors of the Nazi war crime trials, you get the Nuremberg Code in 1947. That's what established the fundamental rule. You need voluntary consent. The Declaration of Helsinki built on that in '64, but the real tipping point here in America came in 1972, when young Geraldo Rivera's TV report on Willowbrook horrified the entire country. The public outcry was so huge that just 2 years later, the National Research Act was passed, making independent ethical review the law of the land. So when we talk about medical ethics today, we're not talking about some abstract idea in a textbook. We are talking about a system of protection, a shield built on the memory of those who were experimented on without their consent, their knowledge, or their humanity. And these are the non-negotiable pillars that rose directly from all that suffering. Informed consent? That exists because parents at Willowbrook were coerced and lied to. The right to withdraw? That exists because prisoners at San Quentin were completely powerless. An independent review? That exists to make sure a single researcher can never, ever have unchecked authority again. These protections were bought with their pain. And that leaves us with this final, crucial question. Every protection you and I have today when we go to a doctor is a legacy. It's a debt we owe to those who were forgotten and abused. So we have to keep asking ourselves, are we doing enough to honor that debt? Are we being vigilant enough to make sure this never, ever happens again?